My name is Danielle Mercer, and I was the acceptable disappointment. Not the kind that makes for dramatic family stories. I never ran away, never failed out of school, never embarrassed my parents in public. I didn't drink too much, didn't marry the wrong person, didn't ask for bail money or forgiveness. My failure was quieter and far worse in my parents' eyes. I was ordinary. I became a high school science teacher, not the surgeon or specialist my parents had mapped out for me before I'd even chosen my first elective. I didn't chase prestige, I didn't climb the ladder they built. I stepped off it entirely and chose a life that made sense to me. My older sister Elaine, on the other hand, followed the blueprint perfectly. She married Bradford, an investment banker with a smile polished by private schools and confidence reinforced by money. She leveraged her law degree into a partnership at a prestigious firm. Their two children were photogenic, articulate, and already being positioned for Ivy League futures. Their Christmas cards looked like lifestyle catalog covers, soft lighting, neutral sweaters, effortless success. Our parents, Richard and Margaret Mercer, never hid their preferences. Excellence wasn't encouraged in our family, it was expected. And deviation, no matter how ethical, stable, or fulfilling, was quietly punished. I'd accepted my role years ago: obligatory holidays, polite conversations, the occasional comment about my potential that somehow never acknowledged my reality. My real life was elsewhere, with my boyfriend Evan, steady and thoughtful, who loved me without conditions, with our son Ethan, 8 years old, curious, gentle, and desperate to be seen by grandparents who barely noticed him. So when my mother called personally to invite us for Christmas, it felt strange. "Danielle," she said, her voice carrying that familiar authority that had shaped my childhood, "we'd like you all to come this year." Elaine's family would be there too. The whole picture, the whole hierarchy. Something in her tone made my stomach tighten, but I ignored it. Maybe they were softening with age. Maybe this year would be different. It wasn't. By the time my father stood in front of the fireplace and said, "Christmas is for those who made us proud," something inside me had already started to fracture. And when Ethan clutched his flashcards while his cousins tore into tablets and gaming consoles, I knew this wasn't about gifts. This was about worth. And they had just announced, in front of everyone, exactly how much ours was worth to them. The morning after Christmas, my house didn't feel like December anymore. It felt like aftermath. The tree was still up in the corner of the living room, the lights still blinking dutifully, like they hadn't gotten the memo. Wrapping paper from our own small gift exchange sat folded in a tidy bag, because Evan always cleaned as he went, like order could protect us from chaos. Ethan's little pile of "from Santa" presents looked cheerful enough, but the air in the house was heavy, like everything had absorbed the words my father had said and refused to let them go. Christmas is for those who made us proud. It played on a loop in my head, not because it was new, but because it was the first time they'd said it out loud. Evan came into the kitchen while I stood at the counter staring at nothing. He didn't ask what I was thinking. He already knew. He just slid a mug of coffee into my hand and said quietly, "What do you want to do?" I should have said something noble. I should have said, "We'll rise above it. We'll forgive. We'll take the high road." Instead, I heard my own voice come out steady and low. "I'm not letting Ethan grow up believing he's less than." Evan's jaw flexed. "Then we don't go back." It was that simple and that complicated. Because cutting them off wasn't just a decision. It was a war against a lifetime of programming. My mother's smooth, controlled influence, my father's silent judgment, Elaine's constant presence like a shadow that always made me look smaller. And still, the hardest part wasn't protecting myself. It was protecting my son. Ethan padded into this kitchen wearing dinosaur pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked up and smiled, the way kids do when they assume the world is safe. "Is it still Christmas?" he asked. My chest tightened. Evan crouched and ruffled his hair. "It's our Christmas today." Ethan blinked. "But we already went to Grandma and Grandpa's." I felt the old instinct rise. Explain them, soften them, make their cruelty easier to swallow. My mother's voice lived in my bones, whispering, "Don't make a scene, don't be dramatic, don't be ungrateful." But then I saw Ethan's face the night before, how he'd asked through tears, "Why can't we be like them?" And something in me hardened. I crouched beside him. "Sometimes, buddy, people show love in the wrong way." He frowned. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." My answer came out sharp, faster than I intended. I softened it immediately, cupping his cheek. "No. You didn't do anything wrong, not ever. That's the point." Evan met my eyes over Ethan's head, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. If Ethan learns to earn love, he'll spend his whole life trying to deserve it. That day, we kept our promise. We made pancakes shaped like robots. Evan played Christmas music too loudly. I pulled out a box of decorations we hadn't used in years and strung them along the windows. We acted like we were giving Ethan something magical, but really, we were building a wall. A border. A place where Mercer's standards couldn't cross. When the delivery arrived, expedited, like I'd begged the universe to move faster, Ethan tore into the box and found the robot building kit he'd wanted. His eyes went wide. "This is the one." He looked up at me like I'd performed a miracle. I forced a smile. "You deserve it." And while he sat on the carpet snapping pieces together, Evan beside him helping with the tiny screws, I made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I wasn't going to beg my parents anymore. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was going to let them feel what it was like to be outside the circle. But I wasn't going to go nuclear, not yet, because my parents were the kind of people who didn't respond to emotion. They responded to consequences. So I built consequences. The first step, selective silence. When my mother called 2 days later, I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to hurt her, though I did, but because I wanted to break the pattern, the automatic response, the way I'd spent my whole life jumping when she snapped her fingers. She called again the next day. I let it ring out. On the third call, I finally answered. "Hi, Mom." Pleasant, normal, like nothing was wrong. "Oh, there you are," she said, as if my absence was a minor inconvenience. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd been busy." "We have been," I said lightly. "Ethan's on break. Evan's schedule is crazy. Life doesn't pause." There was a beat of silence. My mother didn't like that. She liked being the axis everything spun around. "Well," she said finally, "we wanted to make sure you got home safely." "We did," I replied. "Thanks." I didn't ask about her health. I didn't ask about Dad. I didn't ask about Elaine's children. I didn't offer details about Ethan's new kit or our second Christmas. I was polite and distant. When she realized I wasn't filling the space, she did what she always did, ended the call in a way that made it sound like she was the one choosing to disengage. "All right then, we'll talk later." "Sure," I said, and I hung up first. It was a tiny thing, but it felt like regaining a piece of oxygen. The second step, evidence. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I opened my laptop. Evan watched me from the couch. "What are you doing?" I hesitated because saying it out loud made it sound calculated. "I'm building a case," I said finally. He sat up straighter. "For what?" "For the day they pretend none of this happened," I said. "For the day they rewrite it. For the day they act like I'm crazy." Evan's mouth tightened. "They'll do that." "I know." So I created a new email account, one my parents didn't know existed, and then one by one, I forwarded myself years of messages. My mother's passive-aggressive suggestions about my career, my father's short, disappointed replies, birthday emails where Elaine was praised in paragraphs, and I was given one dry sentence, family group messages where my achievements were ignored, but Elaine's promotions became full conversations. Then I opened social media. I scrolled through my mother's carefully curated posts, the family photos where Ethan and I had been cropped at the edge, like accidental strangers, the captions about legacy and pride with Elaine centered in every frame, the Christmas post with the hashtag that still made my skin crawl, #family-tradition. There wasn't a single mention that Evan and Ethan and I had been there. It wasn't just favoritism. It was erasure. I screenshot everything. Evan came to sit beside me and stared at the screen. "How did you live with this for so long?" I didn't have a good answer. Because when you grow up in it, you don't see it as abnormal. You see it as weather. You learn to carry an umbrella. The third step, quiet assent. The next part was the one I didn't tell Evan right away, because it sounded too petty, even inside my own head. I started succeeding. Not because I needed to prove anything to my parents, but because I wanted to weaponize their own values against them. In January, I applied for a district grant to develop an advanced science curriculum for gifted students. In February, I pitched a paper to an educational journal about hands-on robotics in underfunded schools. In March, I volunteered for a leadership role on the curriculum development team, one that put me in rooms with school board members and local politicians. And I did it all quietly, like planting seeds underground, because my parents didn't value me when I spoke. They valued me when other people did. By April, I got the grant. By May, the paper was accepted. By June, I was being introduced at community events as one of the innovative teachers in the district. And I didn't tell my parents a word. Let them hear it secondhand. Let them feel the discomfort of not being in control of my narrative. The first test, Elaine's birthday. 3 months after Christmas, my mother called again. Her voice was smoother this time, lighter, like she was sliding a knife in with a smile. Danielle, we're having a garden party for Elaine's birthday at the club. It would mean so much if you all came. A garden party at the club. Of course. I pictured white tents, catered hors d'oeuvres, women in linen dresses laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. I pictured my parents glowing beside Elaine, telling anyone who would listen about her wins. I pictured Ethan standing awkwardly in the background, watching his cousins be adored. My stomach tightened. I'm afraid we can't, I said. There was an instant shift in her tone. Why not? Ethan has a science event that weekend, I replied smoothly, and I'm involved. Oh, she sounded genuinely surprised. Can't someone else do it? This is important for Ethan's future, I said calmly, using their language like a shield. You've always emphasized education and achievement. I wouldn't want to let him down. Silence. It wasn't just satisfying. It was addictive. My mother recovered quickly, of course. She always did. Well, she said stiffly, we'll miss you. Another lie. When I hung up, Evan looked at me with a strange mixture of admiration and unease. There is no science event, he said. No, I agreed, but there will be. He stared. You're really doing this. They need to understand there are consequences, I said, my voice quiet but sharp. And Ethan needs to see that we value him even if they don't. Evan exhaled slowly. Just don't let it consume you. I nodded because I wanted to believe I was in control. But the truth was, I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. And somewhere deep inside me, under all the pain and love and rage, I wanted them to feel what it was like to look in and realize the door was closed. By early summer, my parents knew something was wrong. They didn't say it outright, not at first. Richard and Margaret Mercer were far too invested in appearances for that. Concern, in their world, was something you disguised with politeness and invitations, not vulnerability. But the calls came more frequently. I still didn't answer most of them. When I did, I was cordial, efficient, unemotional. How are you, Danielle? My father asked during one call, his tone clipped but careful. Busy, I replied, in a good way. He waited. I didn't elaborate. That silence, that refusal to perform, was doing more damage than any argument ever could. The information gap. The funny thing about influence is that it doesn't disappear when you stop chasing it. It reroutes. I began hearing about what my parents were hearing about me before they ever mentioned it themselves. A superintendent my father golfed with asked him if his daughter was the one running that new science initiative. A hospital board member mentioned my curriculum project to my mother in passing. None of it came from me, and that unsettled them. When my father finally called to congratulate me, tentatively, like he was testing ice, I was in the car, parked outside Ethan's school. I heard you're involved in some kind of program, he said. Oh, I replied lightly. That? It's nothing big. There it was, the pause. Well, he said after a moment, Richard Blackwell seemed quite impressed. Richard Blackwell, superintendent, country club member. The kind of approval my parents valued because it came from outside. That's kind of him, I said, already reaching for the door handle. Listen, Dad, I've got to go. Ethan's getting out. I hung up before he could ask another question. At home that night, Evan watched me move around the kitchen with a kind of wary respect. You're denying them access to your success, he said. I'm denying them ownership, I corrected. Because that was the thing I'd never understood until now. They didn't want to be proud of me. They wanted to claim me. The invitation. 6 months after Christmas, my father called on a Tuesday evening. Not my mother. That alone told me this wasn't casual. Danielle, he said, clearing his throat, your mother and I have been talking. I leaned against the counter, already knowing where this was headed. About? Well, we're concerned. We haven't seen you, Evan, or Ethan in quite some time. We've been busy, I replied evenly. Life doesn't stop for social visits. Yes, of course. Another throat clear. We were wondering if you might come for dinner this Sunday. Just something small. Who else will be there? I asked. A pause. Just us. Not Elaine, not her family, not the grandchildren they paraded around like trophies. Just the branch they'd pushed aside. I felt something like grim satisfaction curl in my chest. Let me check our calendar, I said. I'll call you back. I hung up without waiting for a response. When I told Evan, he raised an eyebrow. That's new. It's fear, I said. They're afraid of losing access. And are we going? Yes, I replied, but not the way they expect. The terms. When I called my father back the next day, I didn't ease into it. We can come on Sunday, I said, but we'll need to leave by 7. Ethan has school, and Evan has an early shift. Of course, he said quickly, too quickly. And, I continued, there will be no discussions about career paths. Not mine, not Ethan's. We're not coming to be compared to Elaine's family. There it was, the thing he pretended didn't exist. I'm not sure what you mean, he said carefully. I think you do, I replied. But if you'd like, we can discuss Christmas. Silence. There's no need for that, he said finally. We're just looking forward to seeing you. Then we'll see you Sunday, I said, and ended the call. Evan had heard every word. You set boundaries, he said softly. Long overdue ones. The dinner. Driving to my parents' house that Sunday felt different than it ever had before. I wasn't rehearsing answers. I wasn't bracing myself for disappointment. I wasn't hoping to impress. I was observing. I briefed Evan and Ethan on the plan like a mission. We leave at 7, I said. If they bring up comparisons, we redirect once. If it happens again, we leave. Ethan nodded solemnly. Okay. And Buddy, I added, glancing at him in the rearview mirror, you don't have to be impressive tonight. Just be you. He grinned, missing one tooth. Can I tell Grandpa about my robot? Absolutely. My mother greeted us at the door with an enthusiasm that bordered on desperation. She hugged Ethan a beat too long. She kissed my cheek like she was trying to reclaim familiarity. Dinner was strange. All my favorite childhood foods. A calculated nostalgia. An unspoken apology that didn't quite know how to speak. My father was attentive, almost awkwardly so. He asked Ethan about school. He asked Evan about work, and actually listened. I said very little, and that seemed to unsettle them most of all. When Ethan proudly described his robot and the little science fair he'd helped organize at school, my father opened his mouth, and then stopped. Caught my expression. Instead of correcting or redirecting, he asked to see pictures. That's very impressive, my mother said, and this time it didn't sound forced. Ethan beamed. At dessert, my mother finally said the thing she'd been circling all evening. We've missed you, she said. You've been so busy. Work has been demanding, I replied, but rewarding. Yes, my father added carefully. We've heard. I inclined my head. Nothing more. Then my mother filled the silence. We were thinking, perhaps we could all take a family vacation this summer. Together. Like old times. The beach house. The one where Elaine got the master suite and we got the pull-out couch. The one where every meal and activity revolved around her children's preferences. I don't think that will work for us, I said calmly. She blinked. Oh, why not? We already have plans. What plans? Space camp, Evan answered. For Ethan. Ethan lit up. It's going to be awesome. My father repeated the words slowly. Space camp. He's interested in astronomy, I said, meeting his gaze, and engineering, or teaching, or whatever makes him happy. The message landed. I checked my watch. We should head out. But it's only 6:30, my mother protested. Traffic, I said, standing, and Ethan needs to wind down. They didn't argue. At the door, my mother disappeared briefly and returned with a gift bag. For Ethan, she said softly, just because. Inside was a Lego space shuttle. Ethan's face lit up like fireworks. I caught Evan's eye over his head. This was new. As we drove away, Evan squeezed my hand. They're trying, he said. They're afraid, I corrected. And that's different? Yes, I said quietly, but it's a start. I wasn't ready to forgive. But for the first time, I was ready to watch. If the dinner had been a test, the weeks that followed were an observation period. My parents didn't backslide, not immediately. They called more often, but didn't demand. They sent Ethan cards that actually referenced his interests. A planet book, a set of glow-in-the-dark stars for his ceiling. They even commented on a Facebook post Evan shared about a community science night at Ethan's school. Not glowing praise, not bragging. Acknowledgement. I stayed cautious. I responded, but I didn't initiate. I accepted, but I didn't reward. Because I'd learned something important. Consistency mattered more than apologies. The real test came in late July. My mother called on a Thursday afternoon, her voice carefully light. Elaine and her family will be in town this weekend, she said. We were thinking of doing a casual barbecue on Saturday. Nothing fancy, just family. Just family. That phrase had never meant the same thing for all of us. I hesitated long enough for her to notice. We understand if you already have plans, she added quickly, but we'd really love to see you. That was new too, the preemptive concession. That night, after Ethan went to bed, Evan and I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around mugs we weren't drinking from. What do you think? He asked. This is the first time we'd all be together since Christmas, I said. If they fall back into old patterns? We leave, Evan finished. No explanations. I nodded. And we prepare Ethan, but we also prepare him for the possibility that it might be better. When I called my mother back and accepted, I built in an escape hatch. We may need to leave early depending on how Ethan's feeling. Of course, she said quickly. Whatever he needs. Saturday arrived hot and heavy, the kind of summer day that made tempers short and expectations high. Elaine's SUV was already in the driveway when we pulled up. I exhaled slowly. First sign of trouble, I murmured to Evan. We're out, he agreed. Ethan, blissfully unaware, was already unbuckling. Do you think Trevor brought his drone? He posted about it. I don't know, I said honestly. But remember, you brought your robot too. My mother greeted us at the door with hugs that felt practiced but sincere enough. Everyone's out back, she said. Your father's at the grill. The backyard looked like a magazine spread, white patio furniture, iced drinks sweating in glasses. My father in a novelty apron, flipping burgers like he hadn't spent decades too important for anything domestic. Elaine rose when she saw us, air kissing my cheek. It's been ages, she said, smiling. Mom and Dad say you've been very busy. We have, I replied. Ethan spotted the drone immediately. Whoa, can I see it? Trevor glanced at him. Sure, just don't touch the controls. It's expensive. I tensed. Then Trevor nodded at the robot in Ethan's hands. What's that? Ethan straightened. It's a robot I built. It follows lines and avoids obstacles. Trevor's eyebrows lifted. Did you program it? Mostly, Ethan said proudly. Madison wandered over. That's actually really cool. I blinked. No sneers, no comparisons. Just kids being kids. They're getting along, my mother said quietly beside me. They are, I agreed cautiously. We talked to Madison and Trevor, she added, about being kinder, about family being more than competition. I looked at her sharply. She met my eyes without flinching. We've been talking a lot lately, your father and I. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, as the kids chased the drone across the lawn, my mother handed me a glass of iced tea. Danielle, she said softly, can we talk? I nodded. We stepped away from the noise, toward the edge of the patio. She didn't start with small talk. Christmas, she said. The word hit like a bell. Her shoulders sagged. What we did, what we said, it was inexcusable. I stared at her, waiting for the justification. It didn't come. We thought we were encouraging excellence, yes, she continued, preparing you. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that you were already worthy. My throat tightened. Your father hasn't been sleeping, she said quietly. He keeps replaying that morning, asking why we didn't see how small we made you feel. She paused. And Ethan. That broke something. I hadn't expected that name to come from her mouth like that. Soft, regretful. Why now? I asked. Why say this now? Because, she said, voice trembling, we didn't realize how far we were pushing you away until you stopped chasing us. She reached out, hesitated, then gently squeezed my arm. We love you, and we want to do better. I didn't answer. I looked past her, toward the yard. Ethan was laughing, real, belly-deep laughter, as Trevor guided the drone to hover above the robot. Madison clapped when it worked. My father stood nearby, watching. He wasn't judging. He wasn't ranking. He was just smiling. For the first time, I wondered if fear had cracked something open that pride never could. But I wasn't ready to declare victory. Apologies were words. Change was behavior. And I needed to see more. I didn't forgive them that afternoon. Not out loud, not privately, not in the neat, cinematic way apologies are supposed to end stories. But something shifted. And for the first time, I wasn't the only one doing the work. The weeks after the barbecue unfolded slowly, cautiously, like everyone was afraid of moving too fast and shattering something fragile. My parents didn't revert to old habits. They didn't suddenly become saints either. But the changes, small, deliberate, kept coming. They called once a week, not daily. When I said I was busy, they accepted it without protest. When Ethan sent them a drawing of a rocket ship, my father mailed him back a handwritten note asking how he'd designed the engines. Not a suggestion, not a correction, a question. Margaret commented publicly on a post Evan shared about a community science workshop, not with vague praise, but with specific words. So proud of the impact you're making. It was the first time she'd ever acknowledged Evan without filtering him through Elaine's shadow. Elaine, for her part, stayed cordial, distant, careful. For the first time in my life, I realized she wasn't the villain I'd built her into. She was a product, rewarded, reinforced, never challenged. Watching our parents recalibrate unsettled her, and that discomfort showed. But she didn't sabotage it. That mattered. The real test came in early September. My mother called with an invitation, another mixed family gathering, this time framed around Ethan's school schedule, not Elaine's convenience. We thought we'd do a simple dinner, she said, nothing formal, and if Ethan's tired, we understand if you leave early. It wasn't just the words. It was the order of priorities. At dinner, when Elaine mentioned Madison's debate tournament, my father listened, and then asked Ethan about his science club without comparing the two. When someone joked about smart genes, my mother redirected it gently. No, she said, different talents, equally valuable. I watched. I waited. And when we left early, because Ethan was tired, no one guilted us. No one sighed or rolled their eyes. At home that night, Evan sat beside me on the couch, quiet for a long moment. I think they're really trying, he said. I think they're learning, I replied. There's a difference. He nodded. So what happens now? I thought about that. About the version of me who would have rushed toward reconciliation, eager to patch over years of damage the moment an apology appeared. That version of me didn't exist anymore. They don't get automatic access, I said finally. They get conditional access. Evan smiled slightly, just like they did. Yes, I said, but with one difference. What's that? The conditions are behavior, not achievement. That fall, Ethan asked me a question one night while we were working on homework. Mom, he said, do Grandma and Grandpa like my robot more than Trevor's drone? I looked at him, really looked at him. No, I said, they like you, not because of what you build, just because you're you. He considered that. Okay, he said, and went back to his work. No lingering doubt. No quiet hurt. And in that moment, I knew I'd already won. Not because my parents apologized. Not because they changed. But because my son would never have to earn love the way I did. Pride, I'd learned, wasn't about legacy or prestige. It was about presence. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking my parents to be proud of me. I was showing them what pride actually looked like.